China's economy is getting so bad, not even its propaganda can hide it anymore. And with political tensions ratcheting up, foreign companies are headed for the exit. Could India replace China as the world's factory? Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. Foreign businesses have been fleeing China, turned off by things like a bad economy, China's paranoia over foreign spies, and the looming threat of a Taiwan invasion. But not at all their human rights abuses. Who needs a clear conscience when you've got cleared checks? Of course, China's been trying to convince the world that it's a totally great place to invest. There's nothing wrong that a little elbow grease can't take care of. That was Xi's message when he spoke to China-friendly business leaders at APEC last year. China will totally open up its supersized economy and things will go back to the good old days in no time. You just need to invest more. Except Xi didn't actually offer U.S. executives any concrete reassurance he would fix the problems that are causing businesses to leave. And because of that, China is continuing to hemorrhage foreign investment, both in terms of businesses moving there and investors in its stock markets. Indeed, foreign direct investment has fallen to a 30-year low. China's stock market, which has always been kind of a risky bet, lost $7 trillion, that's trillion with a T, in just the last 3 years. In fact, Chinese companies are performing so poorly, MSCI just removed 66 Chinese companies from its global benchmarks. This is really bad news for China, because no matter how much elbow grease it uses, foreign investment is the lubricant that really keeps China's economy going. So China's in a catch-22. It needs foreign investment to get its economy back on track, but companies and investors aren't going to put money into a sinking ship. Now, there is a lot China could do to draw investors back in, like for starters, it could stop threatening to invade Taiwan, or it could stop raiding foreign businesses and stop making every foreigner in China feel like a foreign agent. But that would be like asking the sky to stop being blue, the birds to stop singing, or guitar guys at parties to stop playing Butcher Jack Johnson covers. China's not going to do any of these things. And that has investors and companies looking elsewhere. Now, I mentioned that MSCI had dropped dozens of Chinese companies from its indexes. Well, at the same time it did that, it also added a bunch of Indian companies. And it's not just MSCI that's dumping China and moving to India. Wall Street, writ large, is making the same shift as well. According to Bloomberg, much of the cash that used to be headed to China is now heading for India, with Wall Street giants like Goldman Sachs Group Inc. and Morgan Stanley endorsing India as the prime investment destination for the next decade. Businesses are also voting with their feet. Some businesses that have either moved or are just diversifying their supply chains away from China are setting up shop in India as well. Apple, which used to almost exclusively manufacture in China, says it wants to make a quarter of its iPhones in India within the next 2 to 3 years. And according to the Wall Street Journal, Apple is emblematic of a move across companies worried about overdependence on China to move parts of their supply chains elsewhere, most often to Southeast Asia and South Asia. So other companies are likely to follow Apple's lead. Wow, this might be the first time in history and Apple will unspoil a bunch. This is why many are now predicting that India's time in the limelight has arrived. They believe India's economy offers a real alternative to China's, and that as China's economy continues to spiral downward, India's will only go up. But is that true? I'll tell you after this short commercial break. Welcome back. There's been a lot of investment interest in India lately, especially after the Chinese Communist Party took a wrecking ball to the Chinese economy under its Zero COVID campaign. Turns out the zero in Zero COVID were their company's profitability. And it makes sense that people see India as a good alternative to China because they're similar in some key ways. India and China are both geographically big countries in Asia. Their populations, at least for now, are similar in size. They're both seen as big emerging economies that have a lot of manufacturing capacity because of their population size and low wages. And your grandma thinks both of their food is too spicy. But all those things have been true for decades, and yet China has far outpaced India according to most major benchmarks. According to official figures, which I have to put an asterisk next to here because we know China likes to massage its economic data, but according to the IMF, China's economy is 4.5 times bigger than India's and is the second largest in the world. As you can see, India sits at 5th place. For most of the last few decades, China's economy has grown at a faster rate than India's. For example, according to the Economic Research Institute, an Indian factory worker makes less than half that of a Chinese factory worker today. Which seems like it would be another reason companies are leaving China, because again, who needs a clear conscience when you've got a clear check? Except, I'm sure China's free prison labor more than balances it out. So why did the world choose China? Was this just a case of fake it till you make it? After all, China's data is self-admittedly man-made and unreliable, just like all their products. Well, not exactly. There are real differences when it comes to doing business in India versus China. First of all, decades ago, China invested big time in its infrastructure. It especially built up its east coast, where most of the population lives, because it was not only where the workers were, but also close to the ports and ships that took the merchandise overseas. China also cut red tape for businesses that wanted to come in. Back in the 80s, China carved out what are called special economic zones, which are like little capitalist islands in an otherwise planned economy, which must have been super confusing to the people living there. It's like walking around in North Korea and then all of a sudden winding up in Times Square. I hope they offered neck braces for all that cultural whiplash. And China wasn't afraid to plan whole cities around particular industries either. Think like a whole city devoted to making denim, which is actually a real thing. It's so polluted you can't give your house away, but hey, this is a small price to pay for progress. Another big advantage China has over India is its education. In 2018, China had a literacy rate of 97%, while India's was just 74%. India was also well below the global average at the time of 87%. That may not seem like it would matter much for, say, a manufacturing job, but you'd be surprised. Having workers that can't read the label they're putting on a pair of denim jeans could actually lead to some problems. As if people needed another reason to stare at my perfect butt. China has a few other workforce-related advantages over India as well. Chinese workers are generally more productive than Indian workers if you just look at the macro numbers. And the percentage of people in India who are part of the workforce is around 50%, compared to about 75% in China. Part of that is fewer women work in India compared to China. According to a study by Oxford Economics, India will have to achieve a labor participation rate of over 70% in order to achieve the same labor force size as China by 2030. But with all that said, India now has a lot of advantages that give it a competitive edge over China, which I'll tell you about right after this final commercial break. Welcome back. So China's been beating India for decades now when it comes to economic development. And it did that by developing its labor force and building up its infrastructure early on. Oh, and I forgot one other very important ingredient: stealing other countries' intellectual property. Yeah, it turns out when you don't have to spend money on research and development, that's like getting free rocket fuel for your business. It just takes off. But it's shady practices like that that are also pushing businesses away from China and towards other countries. Turns out, you stop wanting to invite people into your home when they keep stealing your fine china. Ironically, China is making India look more attractive by the day. Like I mentioned earlier, India is similar in size to China population-wise. But unlike China's population, which is already declining, India is projected to have decades more growth. That's important because it means India will have a relatively young, able-bodied workforce that can support the older generation. China's got so many retirees now that it's developing robots to take care of them all. Yes, robots taking care of humans. Their plan is just one step shy of being the Matrix. Gosh, you'd think they might have started on that years ago when they were restricting everyone to having only one child. Then the future elderly could have started developing a relationship with the robots as stand-in for grandkids. What a lost opportunity. But just like India's population is still growing, its economy is growing as well. And I'm talking like rocket fuel growth, the kind that China can only dream of now. The IMF predicts India's economy will grow 6.5% this year, compared to 4.6% for China. And economists at global investment bank Jefferies think India could be the third largest economy in the world by 2027. That's important because when foreign companies look at setting up shop in a foreign country, they are also looking at what kind of local demand there is. And like when you're in a relationship with anyone, you think, can I see a future with them? Probably not if their future is a dystopian one. But probably the most important factor for businesses is the political climate. India is a democratic country, which is important to other democratic countries who are trying to friendshore their supply chains. And unlike China, where even bankers are forced to study Xi Jinping thought, India's government isn't mobilizing the population to worship its leader or political system, which is crazy. How can you make people like you unless they think you're a deity? Be nice? Fair? Stop harvesting organs? Impossible. India also hasn't announced plans to invade any of its neighbors. Although Canada has accused India of being involved in the killing of a Sikh leader in Canada, so it's not like there are no tensions. Having a large English-speaking population and a government that has been promoting Make in India since 2014 also helps. But despite all those positives, the EU Chamber of Commerce in China reported that a majority of its members that had left China went to Singapore, then Malaysia. According to the Wall Street Journal, American companies that are leaving China are increasingly turning to factories in places such as Vietnam, Indonesia, and Mexico. So is India going to reap the benefits of all those businesses leaving China? At some point, yes, but it still has work to do to make itself more attractive than its neighbors. Now, I got a video I want to show you, but first, China Uncensored wouldn't be possible without viewers like you. We rely on what I call our 50-cent army to keep the lights on and the show going. You can join the 50-cent army for as little as $1 per episode, and you can even set a monthly limit. So go to patreon.com/China Uncensored and sign up today. As a thank you, I'll answer your questions at the end of these episodes. Today's question comes from Stated Chimp. Do you think Chinese people at home and abroad are ethnocentric? It seems they address anyone not Chinese, ethnically speaking, as a foreigner, even when they are in other countries where they themselves are the foreigners. Can you explain what's going on? Now, that's a very interesting question, Stated Chimp. So if you don't know, in Mandarin, Chinese people call non-Chinese Lao Wai. It literally means old foreigner. And it can be a bit weird when you hear someone from China in America calling Americans old foreigners, since, they're the foreigners. The phrase itself isn't necessarily demeaning. Old is often used in a positive way. It's the same old, Lao, as in Lao Tzu, the founder of Taoism, which means old master. Now, this kind of in-grouping and othering can definitely be problematic, and certainly the Chinese Communist Party tries to twist it into something evil. But nationalism isn't inherently bad. Nationalism can be good. It can actually serve to unite people around common goals, goals that don't have to be evil. In fact, if you want to know more about that, check out the latest episode of my new show, Deep Thoughts While Gaming, about Helldivers 2 and its absurdist look at a future led by Super Earth and managed democracy. Thanks for your question and your support, Stated Chimp, and click on that orange button to support China Uncensored on Patreon. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.